Hey everyone, just jumping in here, hiding in the shop from yet another snowstorm. Today I'm working on a clamshell and I did machine work to it. I get asked this all the time. How do I tighten the squish on a clamshell? If you're going to do this, this is more, I would say this is high level stuff. It's not the most difficult thing, but this is higher level porting because clamshells are really hard to machine. You can't just cut it and send it. There's a lot of work that you have to do in between. So let's get right to the bench and let's look at a Mccullough that I did machine work to, the Super Pro 80. I had to adjust the squish on it. Let's get to the bench and I'll show you what problems you create. It's really a headache porting these things when you want to adjust the squish. So we're at the dirty bench. I've been cleaning this thing all morning. Just kind of getting a handle on what this saw needs. Cleaned up this piston. There's a few little marks on the bottom, and I think that's just from this thing rolling around in a box. No big deal. Here's the bottom of the cylinder. Here's the top. Let's see if we can get you guys right in. Friends, there was a little... It's like a little pocket, little nodule in this cylinder. I've run into this quite a few times lately. Little hole there. I'm not worried about it. It's, I don't know, 5 thou deep. But anyways, this is the finish of that my lathe is capable of. Very fine, very smooth. Looks factory. So this goes back to my video about if you're going to do machine work to a saw, kind of know where you're at with your lathe, because like I said, if your lathe is not super tight and it's not capable of very tight machine work, you may want to skip your squish band adjustments, machining the base and lowering the cylinder, because you may end up with a finish that, or a cylinder that, like I said in that video, is cocked one way or the other. Okay, you don't really want that. Now, these Macs are very, very loose. Okay, there's about an 1/8 inch of slop left and right. Does that mean they'll tolerate a sloppy machine job? I don't know. I'll try and keep these things tight. So what I did was I made a new mandrel this morning after I cleared snow. I made a new mandrel, 52.4 millimeters it was. And I cut it and sanded it till it was perfect, okay? Just the slightest little bit of movement. And you kind of got to have that, or what happens is if you get any heat in the cylinder when you're machining it, and you shouldn't, but if they're like a really tight fit, sometimes you can't get the cylinder off after. So just something to be aware of. Okay, I'll put my dial indicator on the mandrel. I was able to dial it out to about 1,000th, which again is all my machine is capable of doing with that setup. Okay, would it be better if it's tighter? Perhaps, but it's good enough. I've machined a lot of cylinders with my lathe. I've never had one wear out a piston, so maybe I'm just lucky. But anyways, and I ended up zeroing it all out. Okay, you can see there's a ring there on the squish band, and everything was very happy. And when I zeroed it out and got everything tight, and I put my cutter on here, and you do your little touch off pass to zero your cross slide. When I first touched this, it cut a perfect little cut all the way around, which told me that everything was as zeroed as it was factory. Okay, meaning the relationship between my cylinder base and my squish band was perfect. You know what I mean? Like sometimes if things are off, or sometimes you get a cylinder that the squish band is not level with the base, you go and do that first cut and you only cut half the cylinder. A lot of times, if everything's zeroed out and you do that, well, you're just making the cylinder better because you've cut it straight. Okay, so you want to machine your squish band, or you want to tighten the squish on your clamshell. Okay, now, why would we do that? Well, I want to raise the compression on this saw, okay, because I'm going to port it, and I'm probably going to raise the exhaust port. So, stock, and again, I measured everything a second time. Oh, and it's funny, friends, you guys were saying, oh, you read the transfers wrong. I did, and that's why, if you went to the whole end of the video, I re-timed my transfers because I knew there was something off. There's no way this thing had 30 degrees of blowdown stock. The problem is with Max for me is I have to read it backwards because the way these cylinders lay down, normally you're timing it like this, okay? So you end up timing the saw funny, and I end up reading it backwards because I'm the way my wheel spins. So, okay, so this thing, I retimed everything. Exhaust is 102, intake is 134, transfers are 122. Now you might ask, why do I not have the timing wheel on this saw? Well, because it would time exactly the same even though I did a base cut. Okay, now if you guys look, this is the hard part. I did this on Buchan's Super Pro 70. I built that for him years ago. I had no idea what I was doing with Max. I went stupid on that saw. I over-intaked it to the point that it wasn't the best idler. Now, it still does idle, but not great. Buchan didn't care. He goes, Jesus, thing rips. And I'm like, I don't like this saw. I mailed it to him. He ran it, and he's like, Jesus, thing rips. And I'm like, it's not very good. So, again, opinions vary between the builder and the runner. But I always say he's the driver. I'm just the mechanic. So, sorry, I'm wiping this thing as I'm talking to you guys because it's filthy. I need to throw this in the ultrasonic and give it a bath. Okay, so you have your piston. I cleaned this up a little bit. Like I said, there's a couple little marks right here. No big deal. So what you end up doing is you put your piston in here. Okay, the PTO side bearing is a roller bearing, like a 200T has, with an aluminum sleeve around it. Okay, and that just sits on here. And then if you've never seen one of these, Max are weird. It has a circlip. Okay, has a circlip, and what centers the crank is there's two grooves, one here and one there, and there's a circlip around this. This is like a 6203 bearing with a groove machine into it. Okay, you can't really buy these anymore, friends. I don't think. You can still get crank seals. I ordered a set of crank seals for this saw. Okay, now watch this. I'm going to take my bottom. Okay, I'm going to slide it on right here. Hey friends, it's upside down. That is so funny. I'm not editing that out because I don't want you guys to think I don't do silly things like that. Because I do. Okay, you put this thing all back together. And what you end up with, bring you guys right in there. You end up with a gap, okay, on both sides. What's really hard for the builder when you're building a saw like this is there's no reference points, okay? The way I did it last time, I hand fit these, and what I do is you can either take gasket material or whatever you want, but I ended up eyeballing it, okay? I'm putting feeler gauges in here. Okay, Now this is roughly, okay, this fits on both sides. Now this doesn't really rock if you do it properly. Okay, it's tight on both sides. Let's measure this. We're going to zero out our caliper here. Hold on a minute here, friends. I don't think I had that bottomed out. No, I didn't. So I have too much shim in here, basically. Okay, run this in there. There we go. That's a little bit better. Might need one or two more. She's just giving me. Okay, so it's a little bit tighter on the top than the bottom. Okay, right there. And right there. Now what you do is take your calipers and measure about 46 thousandths. Now, out of the box, this saw had 65,000 squish. So I have 19,000 squish left. So I'm going to push this one to the limit. I want to see if a clamshell will tap the cylinder at higher RPM when it gets hot. It may not. Now, the question is, now how am I going to get this to fit? Now, what I do is you start. The last one I did with a sanding drum and a Dremel. And I literally went in here, okay, and I worked on this. Let me get you guys a little higher here. Okay, I went in here and I started, grinding this until this side touched, basically, okay? I did one side and then the other side. Now, I find the last one I did, this I had to hog it out. But realistically, if you want to do this, as long as you are putting pressure on this ring, okay, as long as you're putting pressure on these rings here, it will hold in place, okay? But you have to machine it fairly perfect because you want these to be held in, okay? You do not want to spin a bearing in the case. If you do that, you're going to wreck your case. Now, what I found is, because this is aluminum, and what bit me on the last one, because this is aluminum, I literally had to keep machining this out, okay, grinding it, until my crank spun freely again. What I found was when I thought I had it, I would reef everything down and with no glue, okay, and you would go, let's just put this back on here. Okay, you'd reef everything down with no glue and everything would spin, right? I would start spinning the piston. And what ended up happening is I kept grinding out both these sides until this spun freely again. Originally, when I thought I had it, this aluminum sleeve will actually start to crush the bearing, and you will get some load on the bearing. Okay, so that's how this is done. I'm not going to do it on camera because it takes forever, but basically, you start working this until it fits perfectly together, and once you make 100% contact all the way around here, okay, on both sides, okay, once that gap is 0, guess what? You have a perfect cylinder combo, okay? And then what you do is you go in here, and you take your glue, your assembly silicone, you go all the way around here, and then when you pin it together, you add, okay, about 2 to 3 thousandths between your case and your bottom of your cylinder, okay? Everything will be a little bit taller. So if I'm indeed at about 20 thou squish when I put everything back together, I'll be at about 23, which is the tightest I've ever made a Mac. Okay, so the question is, what else are we going to do to this saw? Well, the 850, which is right here, has way bigger transfers in it. 850 cuts at a higher RPM than this should. Now, you guys can see in there, there you go. I moved the edge of the transfer to be in line with the exhaust port, okay? And then I also went in here. It's cool to look at your own work from back in the day. Also went in here, okay? Primary, that's the big transfer. I went in here and I ground this out and I fed this right from the case. I then took this one and just slightly fed it, okay? But I fed my primary before my secondary. And what I found is this saw ran really strong. Now, while I got you guys here, both these saws have about the same size squish band. It's pretty big. Now, if we follow the rules on combustion chambers and squish bands, a wider squish is better for low and mid-range power. Okay, I want to make power up top. So I may try and figure out a way that I can cut this squish band, even if I have to do it by hand. I can make a tool on my lathe, a tapered tool that'll go in there, and I can actually, if it's flat right now, I can actually open up just the edges to let that air get into the combustion chamber a little bit easier. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. If I don't think I can pull it off, I'm not going to do it on this cylinder because we know how rare these cylinders are. Okay, so that is machine work on a Mac in a nutshell. It's not that difficult, but it will take time. This is going to take me a couple weeks probably to fit this because I have to do it by hand. And I do not, well, if I overcut, the biggest thing is, friends, these pockets have to line up. So another thing I did in the past to get a reference is I took a 1-2-3 block, which is a machinist tool. Okay, it's a perfectly flat block of steel, and I clamped it onto here, okay, so that I could get measurements and see how far I needed to go. Okay, and also I want the distance to be the same. Okay, I want the distance from the base, okay, to the bottom to be the same, because if it is the same, then my crank more or less is sitting flat. Okay. What else can I tell you guys? That's about it for these. It shouldn't be too difficult, but I get asked this all the time. You could do this to any clamshell that has enough material. What you're going to find with a lot of modern clamshells is the bottom is just a thin, flat plate of aluminum. I don't think I've ever seen one of steel, but you end up, you might not have enough material to grind. I could also grind it in the bottom here. Now, what are the drawbacks to this? Well, I'm going to tell you this. I ran into this last time. Okay. You have to be able, see how there's slots in there? You have to be able to move your coil far enough back. Okay. 40 thou back. Also, this being a point saw, where does that go? Right here. This being a point saw, I better be able to still screw, okay, put these screws into the case. Now, I'm going to be real close here. On this one, I had the same problem on the last saw I did. Okay. Worst comes to worst, I'll put this back together. Okay. And I will drill a new hole farther down Okay, because what I'm doing here is the points, I have to be able to install and adjust my points. Now, friends, one of the reasons why I went to an electronic ignition in the last saw, I put one of those chips in there. Hold on a second. One of these. There's different name brands. These are the ones I buy. You can buy these on Amazon, eBay. They're cheap. I bought about 15 or 20 of them years ago. But this will convert this saw from points to electronic ignition. Basically, you just mount this anywhere on the saw. I usually put it about right there where the condenser bolts up, and I take everything out of here. Okay, and it turns a point saw into a regular ignition. Now, my original thought, just while we're here, is I was going to take this newer non-points coil and try and mount it on this cylinder. But the problem with that is the mounts are different, okay? One here and here. This one mounts here and there. Now, I have done this before. What you can do is you can make a plate that bolts to here and to there, okay? And you can actually put your screws back in, okay? And that plate would bolt in between here, here, and the third point. That way you can get your coil centered on the flywheel and still get an ignition. Problem with that on these is these are threaded right through, and you only have so much in there. So the plate has to be thin. I think the last one I made was out of thin, about 1/4 inch aluminum, but I drilled the aluminum. I took about 1/8 off of here, and I drilled the aluminum in half so that I could countersink my screws and put that ignition on there, which is kind of what I want to do, but we'll come to that when we get to it, because this saw needs a flywheel, and I have to see what I have in my Mccullough bin for flywheels, or we're in trouble, because this one's broken here, 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 and there. This went into my Mccullough box, friends. I do have a brand new, never used 850 piston, okay, thin ring. I've been saving it though. I'm not going to put this in this saw, but they do exist. Okay, I've had that for a long time. My buddy Dave gave it to me. And literally though, I was just going through my spares. I have a whole bin full of Mccullough screws, just random parts for Mcculloughs. I don't have a ton of parts. I have less parts for Mcculloughs than anything. Now what I do have is this flywheel, but I don't think, oh, would you look at that? It looks like it's keyed pretty much the same. Sorry friends, I'll get you guys. It's not the right flywheel, but it's right-ish. See, what do we got here? Sorry, recoil spring. So these are both clocked the same way. This is probably like a 1010 flywheel. It looks good though. It's got more fins. It's probably, well, yeah, it feels like it's a little bit heavier, but we could probably, let's see, this goes on to here. Okay, so this taper appears to be the same. Okay, so we do have a flywheel. I don't know how I remember that because I haven't been in this bin for 5 years probably. Okay, so that fixes that. I have rings. We've established that. I'm just digging off screen here. I think I have a coil. I remember the coil was no good on the Super Pro. I have a welded and broken bottom for one of these. You never know though. This stuff comes in handy. You'd be surprised. Muffler. You guys know we're not putting a muffler on this thing. We're putting a pipe on this saw for sure. Okay, friends. Well, am I making a mess here, eh? Let's get rid of this. This can stay here. Okay, guys. Well, these are the things we go through when we're building old power saws. It's not like building a new one, where if you make a mistake, you could just go to the corner store and order a new piston or whatever. I'm going to put this piston back in and make the best of it. The piston in that Super Pro 70 I did for bucking was all scored up. I literally sanded it and reused the rings, and it runs fine. It doesn't have a ton of compression, but like not a ton at all. That thing probably makes 120 pounds of static compression, and but it runs, and it runs good. So that goes to show you, just because you don't have a ton of thump doesn't mean you don't have a good running saw. So basically what I'm going to do with this saw is I'm going to widen the transfers. Okay. I'm probably going to feed them right from the case, same as I did with the Pro Mac. I'm going to raise the exhaust roof, but not widen it. Okay, I'm going to give it a little more intake timing. Oh no, I'm going to widen the exhaust roof. She's pretty narrow in this saw. For sure I am. The exhaust on my Pro Mac, is uber wide. So yeah, I'll go in there and widen that. These transfers are really open. They're really easy to work on. You can get in there. So if I want to raise them, no problem. Okay, friends. So that's what we're going to do with this. Probably get rid of the decomp. There you guys go. Post below. Have you ever done this? Did it work? I mean, I'm sure somebody else has done this. Just because it's not on YouTube doesn't mean it. But it's definitely not something... It's not something that most people would do. It's a lot of work and a lot of time. But I'll get her rocking and rolling, friends. Anyhow, thanks for watching. Take her easy. Later.